Good day, everyone. Welcome to the first live stream of my new series. I'm just going to give it a few minutes to allow people to start coming into the room. If anybody does have sound and can hear me, just can you go ahead and put a 1 into the room, just so I know that there is sound coming through. First off, God bless Dragon Denarius. Thank you very much for showing up. One of the admins, also the other admin, Jay Apologetics. Jay is a very dear brother of mine, and love to hear his input when it comes to the biblical argumentations for the deity of Christ, and also the objections that people have to the gospel and to the Old Testament. So definitely check Jay out. He definitely has a lot of good videos exposing these beliefs. Alrighty, so it does seem like everybody can hear me into the text. Right on, right on. So, good day, everyone, and welcome to another video. I just wanted to let everyone know that I will be doing a small series of videos titled, Why Am I a Christian? In these videos, I will explain why first, I am a theist, and secondly, why the Christian triune God is the only true God. I'll be going through some typical atheist objections and providing responses to them. And I will also provide evidence to why God is the best plausible explanation for everything. After I finish with why I am a theist and why God is the best possible explanation for everything, I will then provide evidence the biblical God is that God that best explains everything. I will then do common objections to our faith to close out the series. I will address Islamic objections, Jewish objections, and lastly, a few Unitarian objections. I pray that through this series, I can answer a lot of objections that people do have, and that the people that are not Christian allow the Holy Spirit to enter and convict them of their sin so that they can turn to the true Christ. Also, if anyone out there does have any specific problems and they feel it is necessary to go over, please let me know, because after the videos and things to that, I read all of the comments, and I'm doing this to try to help other people. So the more help that I can provide, the better. And now I'm going to give a brief introduction to what I'm going to be doing here, like the points that I'm going to be talking about. So I'll be explaining the cosmological argument, the fine-tuning. I'll be giving facts pertaining to the cosmological and the fine-tuning arguments. I will provide, I believe it's 3 typical atheist arguments, and then I'm going to provide the responses to those arguments, and we'll see where that comes to. I'm hoping that it's only about a 30 to 40-minute video, but we'll see with the time that I do have. So, for everyone out there that does not know who I am, my name is Chris Claus, and I am a Christian apologist. I used to be an atheist, and then I came to the truth that a God does exist, and that this God is the triune God of Scripture. I'm doing this new series in hope that at least one person can come to know that God does exist and that the triune God is the only true God. As I promised, I am going to start off with why am I a theist? In science, there are different theories, and the theory that is most accepted universally is the Big Bang theory. This theory identifies a beginning to everything, and what I mean by everything is time, space, matter, and energy. And today we will see what the conditions were like at the time of the Big Bang. So, a trillionth of a second after the Big Bang, the universe was small enough to fit inside the palm of your hand. After a tiny fraction of a second later, it was the size of Mars. Another fraction of a second, and the baby universe had grown to 80 times the size of the Earth. A trillionth of a second after the Big Bang, our newborn universe was still expanding, but it didn't contain matter. It was pure energy. Einstein's famous equation, E equals mc squared, showed that mass and energy are interchangeable. It gave us the knowledge to build weapons of mass destruction. It also revealed how the universe created the first matter. When a nuclear bomb explodes, a tiny amount of matter is annihilated and converted into energy. In the baby universe, the exact opposite happened. It converted pure energy into particles of matter. But there was a problem. The universe created both matter and its arch rival antimatter. And when these two met, they obliterated each other. Um, the infant war zone was a battle to the death between matter and antimatter. If they mutually annihilate each other, the universe would remain full of energy, no galaxies, stars, planets, or even life. Fortunately for us, there was an imbalance. For every 1 million antiparticles formed, there were 1,000,001 particles of matter. But there was that one extra particle of matter left over in each volume, and that was enough to account for everything that we see in the universe today. This tiny imbalance led to all the matter that we see in the universe: galaxies, stars, planets, even convertibles in ourselves. The astrophysicist Carlos Frank from the Durham University in England explains that we are a little bit of debris left over from the annihilation of matter and antimatter, so we are the leftovers of that process. If the universe had not developed the slight asymmetry between matter and antimatter in the universe, the universe would be completely boring. There would be no structure, there would be no galaxies, there would be no planets, and quite what this newborn universe was like has challenged cosmologies since the beginning. Since the Big Bang was put forward. Now, in one of the biggest laboratories on Earth, they're able to recreate conditions that are almost certainly existed in an instant after the Big Bang. It's called the relativistic heavy ion collider. It is RIC for short. It's located at the Brookhaven National Laboratory on Long Island. It is a time machine taking us back to 10 millionths of a second to the Big Bang. Now, after the initial inflation and after the antimatter and matter war, the early Earth was still didn't have light until the first stars were formed. Now, there are regions of nurseries for stars, for new stars. There are young stars in these regions that are heating up gas clouds that surround them and making that gas cloud glow pink. Stars are made out of gas. In fact, you can think of it as having an atmosphere of gas and dust that surrounds all of the stars that we see in a disk. And it's from that gas that the new stars are born. By observing nebulas at different stages in their evolution, the story of a star's birth begins to emerge. It starts inside a cold, dark cloud of dust and hydrogen gas, where a quiet tug of war begins. The cloud begins to dissipate like smoke in the air, but gravity was to pull it together. There are in kind of balances between gravity pulling in and gas pressure pushing back out. Eventually, gravity wins and the material crunches down into a disk that is the beginning of a star. As the gravity pulls more and more gas towards the center of the disk, it gets denser and denser and harder until finally at 18 million degrees, a miraculous transformation takes place. Hydrogen atoms fuse together to form helium. And with a burst of nuclear energy, a star begins to shine. These stars eventually get their nuclear fires going in the core. And when they do, they heat up and they can expel the material that surrounded them, so that it kind of clears up the neighborhood in a way, right? So over the next few million years, the wind blows the surrounding gas into spectacular swirling patterns, and it blows away the gas, and it blows away the dust, and lets us see the beautiful new thing. This is the beginning where stars are born. Remember, all of this has to take place for us to be able to live, right? Now I'm going to jump into the fine-tuning argument, and I was reading a lot of Stephen Meyer. So Stephen Meyer says the fine-tuning of the laws and the constants of physics in the initial conditions, that is, the arrangement of matter at the beginning of the universe, is one of the most extraordinary discoveries of the 20th century in physics. It started in the 1950s with a man named Fred Hoyle, a prominent British astrophysicist. Now he is Sir Fred Hoyle, and discovered the conditions that were necessary to make it possible for carbon to form in the universe. It were incredibly improbable. And there were many conditions that had to combine to make it possible for the lighter elements, in particular beryllium and helium, to combine to make carbon. It is also apparent to Hoyle and many other scientists that we need carbon, because carbon is a molecule that allows a long chain of molecules to form, and it's necessary for storing information, which is a critical condition for life. All life is carbon-based. People have been speculating about life being silicon-based or something else. But Hoyle and other physicists who knew the score knew that wasn't a serious proposal. And so it absolutely shocked Hoyle when he discovered how many different parameters had to be just right as they were in order to form carbon. Now, carbon forms in the center of stars through a process known as nuclear synthesis. In the gravitation inside stars is too weak, if the gravitation inside stars is too weak, then the temperature of the star won't get hot enough so that the beryllium and the helium will combine to form carbon. Beryllium and helium being lighter elements, if the gravitation is too strong, however, the star will simply burn up before those critical reactions can take place. So that was only one of a whole suite of exquisitely fine-tuned conditions. It had to be just right. And when they did the mathematics on this, and when they calculated how finely tuned these parameters were, they were getting numbers that were 1 in 10 to the biggest exponent numbers in each case. So it's a kind of concept like engineering tolerance. Things have to be within narrow bounds in order for things to work. So in order to get a life-friendly universe, we are in kind of what you might call a Goldilocks zone, where multiple parameters Goldilocks zone of multiple parameters. Now we know about 3 dozen of these: the expansion rate of the universe, the strength of the gravitational attraction, and the ratio of fundamental forces like the electromagnetic force and the strong nuclear force. All of these, the strength of these forces have to be just right to allow for life to exist in building carbon. Having stable planets and galaxies, many conditions of life depend on these fine-tuning parameters being just right. So if you think of it as a Goldilocks universe, not too hot or not too cold, the force is not too strong and the force is not too weak, the speed of light is not too fast and not too slow, and the expansion rate of the universe is not too fast or not too slow as well. It's things that are just right. And this has caused many physicists, Hoyle in particular, to shift their perspective on the Big Bang worldview questions. Hoyle was an atheist who resisted the discovery of the Big Bang because he thought it implied a creation event. And he came up with an alternative theory that was later refuted. It was called the steady state theory. But then after the fine tuning, Hoyle realized that there must have been some design that the universe, and he said a common sense interpretation of the data suggests that a super intellect has monkeyed with physics and chemistry to make life possible. So what's the fine tuning? So what the fine tuning is about is powerful evidence of design that has come out of physics. So again, fine tuning is a powerful evidence of design that has came out of physics. So now we understand that in the early universe, we had that massive cosmic war between antimatter and matter. But remember, even scientists will tell you, for every 100 million antimatter particles formed, there was 100 million and one matter particles formed. After the war ensued, that one extra particle that was left over from the 100 million constitutes all matter that we see in our solar system today. Also, not just that, but the gravitational pull could not be too strong nor too weak. The inflation rate could not be too strong nor too slow. The speed of light could not be faster nor slower. Each thing has to be in a certain zone, a certain okay range, right, for life to actually exist. And this is why the physicist Hoyle, Sir Fred Hoyle, come to the conclusion that it seems like there was a designer behind the universe. And he said, common sense interpretation of the data suggests that a super intellect has monkeyed with physics and chemistry to make life possible. So that's what the fine tuning is about, truly. Now, do I believe that this is solid evidence 100% that it proves that God exists and that you can't go anywhere else? No, but I believe that it is a part of the evidence. So I believe that we need to present a cumulative argument for this, and this is just one of those components of that argument, is the cosmological and the fine-tuning arguments. Now, we do have a lot of objections to this, and I'm only going to go over 3 today. The first one that I'll go over is, can a multiverse explain this, right? The next will be, can the weak anthropodic principle explain it? And lastly, I will discuss if a materialist can actually explain this as well. So going back up and starting off with the multiverse, the evidence of the fine-tuning of the laws that constants and the initial conditions of the universe have suggested to many physicists that the multiverse is a setup job. But it was finely tuned because there was a fine-tuner who chose the parameters. A popular alternative explanation for fine-tuning in this idea of the multiverse. The multiverse acknowledges that the conditions necessary to make life on this universe are incredibly improbable, but it posits the existence of multiple billions of other universes that would make the conditions necessary for life likely somewhere, right? And then there's additional assertions that, well, we just happen to be in the lucky universe, so the multiverse tries to expand that sometimes, and it's sometimes called the probabilistic resources. If just one universe isn't enough to render the incredible fine-tuning probable, well, then let's posit a whole bunch of others that at some point the conditions must have had to to have arisen now in order to make the explanation work. Now, the multiverse advocates realize that there needs to be some connection between these different universes. If all the other universes out there have no connection to our universe, then whatever happens in those other universes does not affect the probabilities in our universe. So, in order to portray these multiverses as the kind of outcome of a cosmic lottery, multiverse advocates have realized that they need to posit some kind of universe generating mechanism that would, in a way, provide a common causal connection between all of them. All of the universes have sprung from the same mechanism, and we can think of our universe as just many outcomes in a kind of lottery. Now, and this is where the problem comes with the multiverse, because it turns out that every mechanicism that's proposed, whether some or whether something out of cosmology called inflationary cosmology, or a mechanism for string theory, what's called a string theoretical landscape. Every mechanism that has been proposed to explain these new universes that come from has itself required prior fine-tuning. Theoretically, you don't get this great variety of universes unless there is something fine-tuning the mechanism. So the upshot of this multiverse explanation and the fine-tuning only by reference in invoking prior unexplained fine-tuning, and so in the end you're left right where you started. You haven't really explained the fine-tuning that makes life possible in our universe, or for that matter, anywhere else. So the multiverse cannot explain all of these type of varieties when it comes to, let's say, antimatter and matter, how the stars were formed, and all this types of different nature. The multiverse just doesn't explain it, and it can't. All you're left with is right back where you started, and you have not explained the fine-tuning within the multiverse explanation. Now, the weak anthropodic principle explained. Now, the alternative explanation for the fine-tuning of the laws and constants and initial conditions of the universe is the idea known as the weak anthropodic principle. According to the weak anthropodic principle, we shouldn't be surprised to find that we live in a universe that has conditions which would be conducive to our existence. After all, we are here, right? And since we shouldn't be surprised by the discoveries that we live in a universe that has conditions that are conducive to our existence, there's nothing to be explained. No surprise, no need for explanation. Now, the problem with this, the alternative explanation is it really fails to reckon with the thing it really does it fails to reckon with the actual argument. So what it does, it really does surprise, in which it really doesn't explain, and that is an incredible improbability of the conditions that are necessary for our existence. We shouldn't be surprised to discover that there are conditions that are conducive to our existence, because after all, we are here, right? But here's an illustration that gets this argument across. It comes from the philosopher of science, John Leslie. Imagine you're standing in a firing squad of trained Nazi marksmen, and they've found that you've been caught in a plot to kill Hitler or something, right? Anyway, the order comes: ready, aim, fire. And suddenly the barrage of bullets the barrage of bullets are fired, and you are behind a blindfold. But the noise stops, and you discover that you're still alive. Then you turn around, take the blindfold off, and there's a pattern of bullets that circumscribes your body, but none of them hit you. Now, he says, of course, Leslie says, what should, or sorry, what do you think of that place? Well, of course, he says, you shouldn't be surprised to find that you live in a universe. Its conditions has conditions that are consistent with your existence. But you should be surprised that you're still alive, because those conditions are so improbable in relation to what you know about the skill of the marksman. So basically, I'm going to stop there, right? So we know that when there's a firing squad of marksmen, now these are people that are trained and everything, so they hit their shots, right? So it is very improbable to have all of those people take those shots and miss you, right? That's just one thing that he's trying to say here. And it says, because those conditions are so improbable in relation to what you know about the skill of the marksman and how many of them were firing at you. So the weak anthropodic principle doesn't really explain what needs to be explained, which is not just conditions that are consistent with our existence. It needs to explain the improbability of those conditions, and that it fails to do. Another problem with the weak anthropodic principle idea is that it confuses necessary condition with a causal explanation. In particular, our need for causal explanation of the incredibly fine-tuned and improbable conditions that are necessary for our existence. Imagine there's a fire in your city, and the fire company sends out an investigator to find out the cause of the fire. The investigator goes out and he says, well, there's some matches there's some matches, there's some gas cans, and there's a few sprinkles of extra gas on a lot of the charred buildings. But what he doesn't really take in any note of that, instead, he comes back and he files his report, and he tells the insurance company, well, I know what caused the building to burn down. It was the oxygen in the atmosphere. They say, what? Oxygen? Yes, oxygen. He says it is a necessary condition of fire. You cannot have fire without oxygen. So therefore, the oxygen is what happened. Now, what is the mistake that he's made? Well, he's confused the necessary condition with a cause or sufficient condition or set of sufficient conditions. And really, the cause was, in this case, as it was overlooked, was all the clues. This is affected with the weak anthropodic principle. It does it say, well, here's it says we are citing a necessary condition of our existence and all these fine-tuning parameters. What more do we need to explain? Why are we here? Well, what we really want to know is not just the conditions, what the conditions are. We want to know whether we need to know whether they are necessary or not. So again, we don't want to know the conditions, we want to know if they are necessary or not. And this is the problem with the argument at hand. We want to know what caused those conditions to come into existence. That would explain jointly why life is present, and that the weak anthropodic principle doesn't do what we need to know. Instead, is a causal explanation. Design provides the explanation because it tells you why the conditions were set and why they are so incredibly improbable. And the weak anthropodic principle does not. Now, lastly, I will address, can materialism explain this? One of the greatest discoveries of the 20th century has challenged materialism as a philosophy at a fundamental level. At a fundamental level is the discovery that the universe had a definite beginning. In fact, the material universe is now thought to have a definite beginning. If you go back enough in time, the curvature of space corresponding to zero spatial volume. That's a consequence of the theorem known as the Singularity Theorem that Stephen Hawking and Roger Penrose proved in 1968. It was a consequence of solving Einstein's gravitational field equations. His reflecting his theory of general relativity. So this is a mind-blowing conclusion. In modern cosmology, there was the first discovery that the universe is expanding outward in every direction of space because of the red shifting light coming from distant galaxies. And then the theoretical considerations from the general relativity also reinforce the idea that the universe, the material universe itself, even time and space began, but there's an infinite tight curvature of space that suggests that there's no place to put any matter. So we have a fundamental challenge to the materialistic worldview, or that worldview of scientific materialism. Now, beginning in the 1980s, Stephen Hawking and other theoretical physicists, who was involved in the 1968 proof of the Singularity Theorem, didn't like that conclusion too much. So he began to think of some other alternative explanations, and Hawking came up with something called quantum cosmology, which he popularized in his book, The Brief History of Time, and that was published back in 1988. The way since the late 80s, there's been this idea that the laws of physics by themselves can explain the origin of the universe from literally nothing, and that therefore there is no need for any kind of external agent or creator, no transcendent cause of any kind. But the laws of physics alone explained, if the laws of physics alone explained where the universe come from, right? So whereas in the 1980s, there were books coming out like God and the Astronomers by Robert Jastrow, another major figure in astronomy, and we're saying, hey, look, the Big Bang Theory, this Singularity Theorem clearly has three problematic implications. It's pointing to the need for cause that transcends matter, space, time, and energy. Who does that sound like? But after the 1980s, this quantum cosmology idea has caught on, and it seemed to kind of neutralize the implications of the Big Bang, at least with respect to being affirmed a stick belief, right? In fact, many of the new atheists have taken up quantum cosmology in their go-to explanation for how to get a universe without God. One of those being actual Lawrence Krauss, right? Now, in the last couple of years, it turns out that there's a couple of reasons to doubt that this idea of invoking the laws of physics and the laws of quantum physics can explain the universe in the first place. There's three main problems. The first is that it missed the whole research program, and it misunderstands what laws actually do. Laws don't explain where matter and energy come from. Laws describe how matter and energy interact once they exist. They don't give you an origins explanation. They describe the ongoing behavior of the entities within the universe. So that's a fundamental philosophical problem. Secondly, a lot of physics isn't expressed mathematically as an equation, and those equations exist in the minds of mathematicians and physicists. They don't actually exist in the nature of our laws described the behavior of the material entities and energy and so forth. but they don't, of course, right? They don't in any way cause things to happen in the material world. So to say that the laws of quantum mechanics cause the universe to come into existence isn't a strange kind of it is a strange kind of category error. It's like saying the latitude and longitude lines on a map are responsible for the rise of the Himalayan mountains. The map describes where the mountains are, but it doesn't tell you how the mountains got there, right? Now, there's one final problem, and this is the one that that I think is most profound. Sorry. The quantum cosmological model wants to describe our universe as reasonable probable outcome of something called quantum mechanical wave function. It's often represented with the Greek letter psi as a function that describes the possible gravitational fields that could be. Instantly or exemplified in our universe, gravity, in Einstein's view, is curved space as a result of concentration of matter. So this universe wave function describes all of the different configurations of matter and all the different shapes of space at the universe that the universe could have. It tries to become an origin explanation when that wave function includes our universe as one of the reasonable probable outcomes of all the possibilities. But here's the problem that he's discovered. In order to get quantum mechanical wave function, you have to solve a prior quantum mechanical equation, something that's analogous to the Schrödinger equation in ordinary quantum mechanics. But the physicists themselves tells us that you can't solve that equation unless you imply a number of what are called boundary constraints, which are limitations on the mathematical degrees of freedom expressed in the equation. And another way to put it is the equation is insoluble without the imposition of boundaries and constraints. But who imposes the boundary and constraints? Who restricts the degree of mathematical freedoms that possibilities could actually exist? Well, it's the theoretical physicist. Now, anytime this is basic information theory. Anytime we say one, we exclude one option and elect for another. We are imparting a bit of information, so there is an infinite number of solutions to this prior equation, and that is what the physicist tells us. Then you have to supply a huge number of boundary constraints to make that equation soluble, or that means that you have to supply a huge amount of information in the mathematical modeling of the origin of the universe. So who supplies that information? The theoretical physicist again, right? Or the intelligent agent. So even in cosmology, I'm really murdering that word, it now appears that there's an information problem. An information problem is solved in our modeling by an intelligent agent choosing the boundary restrictions, choosing the limitations of the mathematical degrees of freedom in various ways to generate a wave function that includes our universe. It is a reasonable probable outcome. So we've got multiple problems with the quantum cosmology, but the deepest one is that it is actually the modeling needed for information to give finely tuned universe. So the biggest problem with this is that it presents the evidence that we need a mind that is transcendent from time and space to be able to give us these type of boundary constraints within mathematics. So it doesn't really help it, it really hinders it. So going back to the start, with the Big Bang, I don't believe just this video alone is evidence for the existence of God, but it is a cumulative case that I will be presenting. This is just the first video. I'm going to be bringing out the moral argument and a few other arguments that we can use as well. And then roughly, probably about the fourth or fifth video, I'm going to start getting into the biblical reasons as well. So I'm trying to go at all types of angles within this. So hopefully it'll be about a 6 or 7 video series. As I said before, if anybody does have any questions on anything like this, all you got to do is put it into the text. I'll get into the text. I'll get your questions. We'll try to get the answers, and I'll try to get them for you in the next live stream. All of these videos will be on live stream. Hopefully, I didn't get to have any expert with us today, but I'm going to try to bring on some experts in the field, and I'm going to have them give us the explanations for that as well. And if I can't get them on, I'll definitely have their words. I won't plagiarize it. I will be giving credit to the people that I've been getting the information from, as I did today. So this ends the live stream of the cosmological and the fine-tuning argument. Now, the fine-tuning and the cosmological argument, materialist, the multiverse, and the anthropodic state cannot actually answer for this. So I'm not saying that this is evidence for a God, but I'm saying that it's the start of the evidence for the existence of a God. And me as an atheist, this is where I had to start with, and then the moral argument and things to this nature. So I'm going to be going over basically how I became a Christian, the things that I believed, why I didn't believe in them anymore, and why I do believe that the triune God is the only true God and is the creator of all things. So thank everybody for coming here. If you can go ahead and spread the link if you did like it, please hit the like and subscribe button. And God bless you all. And hopefully I'll see you tomorrow, or I'll see you on Tuesday for our next installment of our series.